The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. What can be said about this absolute juggernaut of a game that hasn't already been said? Ocarina of Time is the perfect ingredient for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Ocarina of Time feels like an old Betty Boop cartoon. Ocarina of Time is a retelling of Forrest Gump if you really think about it. Ocarina of Time is a story of adventure, discovery, and loss. Loss of innocence, loss of time, and loss of life. It's basically a day job simulator. Development for Ocarina of Time was started on May 25th, 1962 for the Nintendo 64 disk drive. It was initially known as Zelda 64 DD because it was being made for the Nintendo 64 DD. Something most of us really would have never heard of if not for the most criminally underrated YouTube channel really of all time. However, due to the failure of the Nintendo 64 disk drive, development was shifted to a Nintendo 64 cartridge, and Ocarina of Time would eventually come out in Japan on February 30th, 1982, and later in the West on March 1st, 2005. Zelda 64 was a significantly bigger game than Ocarina of Time, a fact we've come to learn as more and more cut content has been discovered over the years. The game itself still contains a fair amount of cut content accessible by things like Game Shark, but development cartridges turning up have led to a substantial increase in findings. The game was reshaped several times to the point that it feels like it's been several entirely different games over the years. After this point, there are spoilers. This isn't a spoiler warning because you clicked on a retrospective for a 25-year-old game, so you've obviously played it and just want nostalgia, which is why I'm happy to be the very first person to make an Ocarina of Time retrospective, as this is a severely underutilized market. There are good videos by people playing it for the first time, and the obvious people like King K and Liam Triforce's videos, but they're merely Zelda experts. I am a Zelda high sage. Our story begins with the great Deku Tree telling his friend Navi that Link has to save the world, and Navi runs into a fence. Link goes to save the world, but this douchebag says he can't because he's a petty brat. We need a sword and a shield. So Link crawls through a tunnel and runs through a small grove with a boulder that's perpetually rolling in a perfect square. The fact that Minecraft doesn't have a giant boulder that can roll in a perpetual square is insane. Nintendo was doing it in 1962. After property damage, Link gets a shield and sees the Great Deku Tree who wants to eat him. Link agrees because he has a Inside the Great Deku Tree, Navi stops a lot to tell you how to open a door or do other basic things, but as I'll later explain, it's kind of silly for this to not be an option that you can turn on or off in later playthroughs. The original dungeon design for the Deku Tree was epic, and the screenshots from it made people instinctively think it was a wood temple for some reason. Link climbs up and lands on a giant web that doesn't break because he doesn't land on the exact pixel the game wants him to, so he has to climb all the way back up. After going through the rest of the dungeon involving fire and high-tech switch and pressure plate systems and spinning mechanisms with shifting water levels that have been built into a giant living tree for some reason alongside an entire sewage system, Link kills a giant spider because he's an arachnophobe on a mission. Deku Tree is more like two small dungeons smashed together. The first half has you climbing and getting the basics of Z-targeting, which would later become a requirement for 3D action games to work at all, while navigating a vertical space. The second half is a more straightforward run through a few single puzzle rooms that teach different mechanics. It doesn't really feel like the inside of a tree in my opinion, especially the second half, but it serves its purpose well enough. The Great Deku Tree admits to lying to you and dies anyway, knowing Link will probably be blamed by the leader of the village that is proven to be a petty brat. Then Link leaves the forest and says bye to his best friend who gives him an ocarina. This is the part where I'd make a hilarious joke about not throwing the ocarina away, but something tells me that joke was murdered, brought back to life, and murdered again 20 years ago. Link finally leaves the forest and immediately gets caught in a dialogue box trap because they know you don't care and will button mash, and this character is the only one who you can skip basically everything they're saying with like one press, and also the only character that defaults to the repeat option, so you accidentally hit repeat and he repeats everything. And they didn't implement an option for people replaying the game to skip dialogue boxes despite knowing people would replay the game because there are multiple save files available. The game's internal flag system means it does know where you've been before. Anyway, after a tease of freedom, you actually get the freedom to walk across a field that's slightly too large to cross in one day, unless you run backwards or sideways, of course. The field and many other areas have these small grottos that are basically caves, and Nintendo really had a lot of caves in this game. As empty and useless as most may be, it's still that many more than Breath of the Wild has. Link reaches the city and finds a lot to do, But since he's on a quest to save the world, he hurriedly rushes to the castle. I forgot to mention that the Great Deku Tree tasks Link with saving the world because he has a bad feeling about a guy that came to the village demanding a sacred stone from him. So he tells Link to go see Princess Zelda, not the King of Hyrule, but his daughter, who's the same age as Link, who's like 10. Link bribes a guard to let him through and immediately gets kicked out because he walked in plain sight instead of kind of in plain sight. After walking all the way, he turns around and walks all the way back, then turns back around and walks all the way back again with a chicken he gets from Malin to wake up Super Mario. Talon was bringing milk to the castle sewer for some reason and just left it there, so Link pushes it into the sewage, which is also the castle moat. Link stealths past the guards by being dead silent and not shouting every time he does literally anything, and meets Zelda, who immediately trusts him with historical religious secrets that everyone knows about the creation of the world, that you've also already been told. Then she sends you to Death Mountain without equipment or supplies despite being a literal child from the wild. If you want equipment, you have to get a job and earn it. No handouts in Hyrule to the people literally tasked by the royal family to save the world from a vaguely suspicious guy. No chance it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that Ganondorf was actually a good guy who became bad because of discrimination. Wind Waker painted Ganondorf as sympathetic, and I'm pretty sure Tears of the Kingdom will have Link mercy kill him because he's tired of being immortal and evil. Anyway, Link should save the world, but instead goes to the ranch because he needs some milk, and then plays hide and seek with a chicken lady and goes grave robbing with an elderly disfigured man in the village. After bribing the guard who only asked for a Pikachu mask for his son in return, he starts climbing Death Mountain, an arduous journey consisting of mostly walking forward. Halfway up the mountain, he finds a village of rock-eating guys that live in a literal mountain next to a crater with a huge stash of giant loose rocks, but go on a hunger strike because they want specific rocks. Basically like cats with treats and wet food. The head Goron pouts because the entrance to the cave with the gourmet rocks is blocked by a giant boulder, and despite there being a bomb flower right next to the giant boulder that can destroy it, it's obviously easier to pout, wait for a literal child to come by saying hi, tell him you're mad, make him find a way to make you happy, then give him a bracelet to augment his strength so he can move the bomb flower and fix the cave. Despite the head Goron being strong and smart enough to navigate the entire fire temple without ever needing a dungeon item or the boss key, but okay. So as this is clearly a dead end, Navi tells Link to go tell Saria that he's saving the world. So Link finds Saria and doesn't tell her, but learns a song and plays it for the head Goron despite it literally being audible in his house the entire time. Link, a genocidal maniac, can't wait to bomb some Dodongos, and goes and does just that, eventually burning one alive until his charred husk is all that remains. Then the Gorons accept him as a sworn brother. Dodongo's Cavern is a relatively straightforward dungeon that's mostly centered around navigating terrain-based hazards and utilizing a 3D space to solve puzzles using mostly gravity and fire. A lot of rooms are huge and you enter them more than once from different levels of elevation, which is neat. Link goes back to the castle town to talk to the mask shop owner and gets a job selling masks. He sells a Pikachu mask to the guard from earlier. Anyway, I'm sure there's some hint in the game to go to Zora's River next, but I always just go there anyway, and as I'm writing this on my phone with one hand, I don't know. So Link goes to Zora's River and flies a chicken. One of the rare instances of a cave behind a waterfall, and one great song later, Link learns the Zora Princess is missing. So he plays a game to earn some money and a Zora scale, which lets him hold its breath for an extra 0.5 seconds. So he goes through an entire underground cave connecting two separate regions of Hyrule in one breath and finds a message in a bottle from the princess that inexplicably arrived here. I don't think Zora's River connects to Lake Hylia, unless Zora's Fountain connects to Gerudo Valley, which then connects to Lake Hylia. If the bottle went from the fountain to Zora's domain, it would have to go under King Zora and him not notice. Unless it does after he moves, but he doesn't move until after you give him the letter from the bottle that you get before he moves. This is an intentional time paradox, and it's an allusion to a later plot twist revolving time travel in Twilight Princess. Anyway, so the letter says that Princess Ruto was eaten by a giant fish god who's a god but not smart enough that he can discern between cannibalizing smaller versions of himself and murder. So King Zora, in a desperate bid to save his daughter, quickly moves so that the literal child rather than the multitude of mature warrior Zoras can rescue her. Link, a twisted bastard, forces the big fish to cannibalize another fish for his amusement, but then also gets eaten. So he goes into the fish to exit through the backside and finds Princess Ruto, who hates him. Anyway, he basically guts the giant fish alive from the inside, but also acts like an antibiotic because he antis a lot of biological beings inside the big fish, eventually rescuing the princess who hates him, but now says she'll marry him. Jabu Jabu's Belly is the worst dungeon in the game, and I legitimately didn't know it had music for like over a decade. I've played this game probably at least once a year, every year since like 2002, and I only noticed it on the 3DS when playing with headphones, that there's music at all. It's very subtle and very minimal. There are areas with a neat visual aesthetic, but most everything about this dungeon is annoying, and every room looking identical doesn't really help, and Ruto will just disappear when you enter certain rooms. So now that the Goron hunger strike is over and Link has usurped King Zora as King Zora, he launches a strike on the castle, only for Ganondorf's undodgeable attack to do 6 hearts of damage, exactly how many Link has, and leaves him for dead. Zelda also flees and throws the item needed to access the literal wish-granting god relic right in front of Ganondorf, who can one-shot the guy holding the other objects needed. So Ganondorf decides giving Link access to the only tool that can kill him in exchange for him getting to see the wish-granting god relic is a fair trade instead of just killing Link, taking the stones, and grabbing the Ocarina. He's later shown to be a professional organ player, playing a relatively complex piece, and as most music in Hyrule is 5 notes max, and the Temple of Time is constantly playing the song used to access it, whatever, I think the Master Sword blocks him from gaining the Triforce anyway, but I also don't think that they all know that the Master Sword is there blocking the way. Before going to the Master Sword though, Link randomly walks through the back alley of a town that clearly just had a large assault large enough to, force the princess to abandon her people, to find one single casualty. So Link gets the Master Sword and is sealed away in the Sacred Realm for 7 years, giving Ganon free reign of the place. Rauru, the important character, tells Link he couldn't carry the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield until he saw some gains, so Link had to work out for 7 years straight. So he goes to leave and a ninja tells him where all the dungeons are, yeah, whatever. So here's an actually important plot point. Ganondorf is a big fan of taxes. Now remember all those times Link had to earn money, both via jobs selling masks and mowing grass and grave robbing and playing games? Well, Link earned a bit of money, but as he was locked away in the Sacred Realm for 7 years, he never reported his taxes. Despite the High RS knowing what he owes or is owed, he didn't report it. So naturally, as a result, the entire nation crumbles, and he exits the temple to find the city in ruins, haunted by the zombies of those who were ruined by his 7 years of tax fraud. So Link goes to the ranch to see that Talon is gone. Probably for the best, as he was an incompetent leech who exploited his workers, but Malin says that Luigi is worse than Mario, and so Link beats Ingo at a horse race to give Talon back ownership of the ranch and steal Malin's favorite horse. Link decides he hasn't had a good night's sleep in 7 years and goes to Kakariko Graveyard to rob a grave first though. That way he can get a good night's sleep. As Dampé is dead now, Link thinks it'd be ironic to steal from him and ends up racing Dampé through his grave to get the hookshot for some reason. Dampé's grave is also attached to the giant windmill, and Link learns that some kid taught the windmill guy the song he was already playing, and that made the well dry up. So the windmill guy teaches Link the song he's been playing for 7 years straight that the kid taught him when he was already playing it again. Then the windmill guy gets mad at Link for playing the song he just taught him and says he did it again, indicating that he knew Link was the kid he taught that taught him the song he was already playing. So after that brain-melting experience, Link decides to actually go to bed for the first time in 7 years and goes home only to find it overrun by monsters. Remembering the giant doorway in the forest he couldn't reach, he decides Saria must be there and goes there, and then the ninja teaches him how to warp to the area that he's already in and that he'll literally have no reason to ever return to after clearing the Forest Temple. So, as the game was originally going to be like Mario 64, it's believed the Forest Temple was originally the hub world. It's also believed there was going to be a Wind Temple, which is why the Forest Medallion has wind on it, and why someone found out the medallions were originally items, and why the Forest Medallion was Furore's wind originally, and why you have to use Din's fire later since there's a fire medallion on the ground. The Forest Temple feels like a castle manor type place rather than a temple. It's got bits that feel like a large mansion, but then literally battlements and courtyards that connect via underground tunnels. The main mechanic is fighting ghosts that have a fire that's required to open the path to the boss. So Link goes through the Forest Temple and kills these already dead ghosts and skeletons and then beats Phantom Ganon at tennis, which embarrasses Ganon so much that he exiles Phantom Ganon to Purgatory. So Saria gives Link a useless medallion since actually cool mechanics were deemed not good enough in favor of random fairies giving you the same abilities randomly. So the Deku Tree's son shows up and tells Link he isn't a Kokiri, which, like, duh, he leaves the forest and doesn't die and ages, and honestly, anyone who played Twilight Princess would know because he turns into a skeleton in the woods, which Kokiri can't do. So Link decides he's had enough trauma for one day, and decides to go visit his Goron brothers who will surely cheer him up. When he walks forward up the dangerous mountain, he finds them all gone except one who's named after him, and finds out they've all been kidnapped by a dragon that likes to eat half-digested rocks. So the Gorons are locked in easily accessible and openable cells in the Fire Temple, where he finds Head Goron entering the boss room without the boss key or the weapon that can kill the dragon, because he can't wait and risk any Gorons being eaten. The ninja guy also gives him another useless warp song. My sworn brother, the dragon is literally locked in a room. He can't get out. Let's just go save the Gorons and get the hammer and leave. The dragon will just starve to death. But as that's too reasonable, and Head Goron literally went on a completely voluntary hunger strike, he obviously goes to his own death because that makes more sense. The Fire Temple has a great aesthetic. It has the most treacherous feeling without getting lost in itself. There are a lot of obvious uses of fire for puzzles, but the aesthetic connects it all together really, really well. It's like half cave, half ancient temple, half weird prison city. So Link navigates this temple full of dangerous traps like fake doors that fall on you before getting the item that lets you see their illusions. Link saves all the Gorons who definitely could have eaten their way out, and gets the hammer and goes Bugs Bunny on the dragon until the literal fire dragon sets itself on fire out of shame and dies. Darunia gives Link a useless medal and sends him on his way. So Link decides he's had enough trauma for one day and goes to see his fiancée. But it starts snowing, and when he goes behind the waterfall, he sees that it's been frozen over and that all the Zoras are dead. So he goes to the fountain to trick the fish god into cannibalism again to cheer himself up, only to find him gone. That giant, obviously an entrance is get-to-able now, so Link goes in and finds another dungeon. So the ice cavern is mostly sliding block puzzles and waiting for Link to unfreeze, but after getting iron boots and ice melting fire, he frees King Zora and only King Zora, who gives him a shirt that makes his lungs invincible. The ninja also gives him an actually useful warp song this time. Way to go. It's also believed and likely that the ice cavern is the leftovers of a scrapped ice temple idea. Unlike the wind temple, there really isn't anyone to be an ice sage. The wind sage was believed to be another unique Kokiri named Fado. I don't know if that's her official name or just what the fans call her. So Link warps to the lake, which is more of a pond now, and enters the water temple underwater. Side note, but the lake was also significantly bigger in an earlier development. Less land maybe, but the lake itself was quite large, and I want to say that's where Jabu Jabu was going to be located. Zora's fountain is a comparable size to the lake, so it could have just been split into two. The water temple is overhated because the meme became the norm, but like the entire second half is a straight shot that's partially a giant cave, and it's awesome, and it has the best mini-boss in the game. The only actually hard part is there's a platform that raises, and there's a path under it that I often missed as a kid and sometimes still forget about. But seriously, the second half rocks. You go up this giant waterfall and pass through a few single puzzle rooms, and then fight your shadow, and then you go through a cave, which goes into another cave, but then a couple more single puzzle rooms. Annoying doesn't really equal hard. The water temple is beautiful though, and really nails the underwater cave temple aesthetic. Still not as much as the original design, and the lake bed temple honestly does the aesthetic the best in my opinion, but it has a large overarching puzzle where you raise and lower the water level, which gets you access to new areas and opens up pathways through old ones. Anyway, the boss is a blob that controls water. The original water temple design was huge and cooler aesthetically, but probably would have been an actual nightmare. Also, a small ways in, Princess Ruto is there and inexplicably disappears despite her basically entire race being genocided, and rather than making a few babies with Link that can later make babies with like the one other Zora and save the species, she goes and dies, leaving the king and the shopkeeper the sole survivors. So the ninja does a sweet dive into the lake, and Link decides he's had enough trauma for one day, but shoots an arrow at the sun, which sets the arrow on fire, and now he has fire arrows. Then he goes to the village because that's the only place that can possibly not be under attack since he's already been there. So he gets there and it's on fire and under attack, and the ninja is trying to fight a formless being that came out of the well, and obviously gets smacked. So the ninja says Link needs to go to the Shadow Temple and teaches him the second warp song that's actually useful. And he goes and uses the fire medallion because that's what makes sense, rather than an easily missable random fairy upgrade, and the Shadow Temple tells him he's not allowed to do the Shadow Temple yet. Link, a prankster, decides to fulfill the prophecy of the kid who taught the windmill guy a song that the windmill guy taught him to teach him to be taught to him that they both already knew, because it'll drain the well as a kid and the formless being came from the well as an adult despite being closed up. So he enters the bottom of the well, and I will once again be the first ever person to make a joke about this death-filled literal torture chamber covered in blood and poop being in an E-rated game. So Link goes through the dungeon and beats up Jeff the Killer and steals a magnifying glass thinking he can create fire ants to invade the Shadow Temple and get past the fire medallion part. I guess I shouldn't have already done that. Link realizes the magnifying glass can see through illusions and goes from point A to point B, beating the Shadow Temple largely. He passed through torture devices on a prison and beats up Jeff the Killer again. The Shadow Temple is cool, but kind of gratuitous and self-indulgent a bit with the macabre theme. It's like Scorn, or the other way around. You already do an entire dungeon that's really shocking, and now you're doing an even bigger one that's basically constant with a spooky theme, so it really loses its charm. Luckily, it's saved by having a lot of really cool single room puzzles, but that's not really a large scale puzzle. It's almost like a linear Metroidvania where you may pass some locked doors, but you hit a dead end with a key and you go back and take a new path, and it's just kind of neat. So now we can see the formless being that should have been at the bottom of the well when he was a kid but wasn't, who's just trying to learn the opening for a hot for teacher but fails, and Link, unamused, shoots him through the eye, murdering him. Zelda's nursemaid or whatever gives Link a useless medallion and he leaves. The village is permanently raining now, and I think the incredible music doesn't play anymore, which is fucking bullshit. Or maybe it does. There's also a family living in the village that have been cursed to become spiders due to their greed, and Link can heal them by killing golden spiders, which gets him a fat check, which you can't spend on anything hardly, except a few minigames. The fishing minigame has a terrible ending, which you get a golden scale which lets you dive slightly longer, and then you later use it to get one heart piece. The other games reward you with rupees. And as I said, you can't really spend rupees on a lot in this game. At least nothing that you really need. Maybe you can't beat Ingo in the horse race and you have to keep trying over and over. So Link decides he's had enough trauma for one day and wants to just be done, so he goes to the desert and snipes a bunch of unknowing defenseless women. After doing this and freeing the beetles, the women deem him worthy to join despite him being a literal arrow in their knee, and says he can go wherever he wants. So he goes into the desert and gets lost until a ghost is like, "Alright, follow me," and follows him through. If it rains in the desert, you can see a pyramid in the distance, which is obviously just a desert joke, but must mean there's a secret pyramid dungeon, obviously. So he gets to the oasis where the last temple is, and the temple is like, "No, we're switching it up. You had a mini dungeon as an adult and as a kid. Now you have a twice as big regular dungeon as an adult and as a kid, and the mini dungeon is optional." So Link is taught an actually useful warp song again by the ninja and returns as a kid and is instantly hit on by an adult woman. Appalled by this, he goes back to the optional mini dungeon, which is a huge array of single room puzzles and combat that each reward you with a key. There's a huge maze room with a ton of locked doors, and after getting through them all, you get ice arrows out of a chest, which are the definition of worthless. Link goes to the temple, and Navi often randomly goes to markings on the wall, but doesn't interact with them, and there are a lot of paintings of Vaati here, which made 16-year-old me Google Ocarina of Time cut content, and through a wacky series of events that's ultimately led to my career path being around electronic music. So Link beats up a definitely not Dark Nut, and sees some old ladies harass the adult woman that hit on the 10-year-old Link, and put her in timeout. The Spirit Temple is the most temple. It's also got the loudest and most prominent level theme music in the game by a lot. Some of the dungeon themes are samples that have been manipulated to hell and back with different types of more subtle instruments layered in. But the Spirit Temple theme is as grandiose as the actual dungeon layout and design. So Link returns as an adult and does the other half of the temple, learning useful skills like hookshotting to a giant statue's boob. He beats up another Dark Nut and the woman Nuburu is inside, and then the old ladies find this so funny that they fusion ha 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 and fight Link, who kamehameha ha ha's right back and literally sends them to heaven. So Nuburu gives him a useless medallion and regrets hitting on him as a 10-year-old instead of as a 17-year-old. So Link goes back to the Temple of Time, and the ninja is like, "Ganon only has one Triforce and you have another and I have another despite not even being here. Oh wait, yeah I was." And he strips his ninja tights down into nothing more than an armored regal dress, revealing he was Zelda, and Ganon's like ha 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 ha, and kidnaps her, and Link, traumatized out, goes to Mario Kart 8 to do Rainbow Road so he can get into Ganondorf's castle. So Ganondorf's castle was originally the hub world supposedly, and it shows because each room is a room based on past dungeons except the forest room being wind and the water room being ice. There's also a great fairy fountain outside his castle in the same spot as the one who gives you Din's fire that basically doubles your hearts, which is kind of overpowered. Ganondorf also employs Deku scrubs to run a shop and fairy dispensary under the bridge in his castle that no one ever mentions. So Link beats all the rooms and opens the tower inside of the castle and beats all the monsters and uses the boss key to enter a room with no boss, and then finds Ganon, who's practicing for organ recital. Furious, Ganon demands he plays tennis with him, and when he loses, he's so ashamed and mad he blows up his own castle and Link and Zelda climb down really fast. He then transforms into a monster that was supposed to be way bigger and you'd climb it Shadow of the Colossus style, but the N64 was a little baby and couldn't handle it, so instead you just kinda smack his tail and stab him until he dies. Then Zelda's like, sorry for all the trauma my discrimination may have caused. If we were nicer to the Gerudos, Ganon wouldn't have shown up to attack like he says in Wind Waker. So then she sends him back in time to be a child despite being an adult and having adult trauma. Then if that wasn't enough and he got no credit, Navi just ditched him too without a bye or anything. Navi leaving is more trauma and leads to Majora's Mask happening at all. I can't fathom why she doesn't at least say what's going on or where she's going. Fan theories range from she fulfilled her purpose and went to die to she doesn't really care about Link beyond her call to help him, which is directly countered in the Ganon boss fight, but imagine being an adult with one friend and then suddenly you're back to being a kid with the mind of a kid that became an adult without growing up, so now back in the body of a kid again. Zelda as Sheik does just kind of show up for poetic dialogue dumping with a warp song, but she does say a few lines that have been cringified over the years. I think a pro wrestling commentator said one once, and I gotta find that clip again if so. They're great quotes, but good God, so pseudo-deep, people love saying the exact same thing like it was life-changing. The only other things really to talk about are the trading quest, I guess. After giving the guard the Not Pikachu mask, you're given a skull mask to sell. You befriend a Skull Kid in the woods and give him the mask, which is an allusion to the trophy Skull Kid in Super Smash Bros. Then you have a bunny hood to give to the Running Man, no idea how you find or know, and a Redead mask to sell to the kid in the graveyard whose dad is presumably the guard. Then you get some other masks and the Mask of Truth, which basically gives you access to like mildly humorous one-liners. The adult trading quest sees people literally die and gives you a sword that's somehow stronger than the literal goddess's sword. I don't remember the exact sequence, and as I'm literally typing all of this from memory at my soul-destroying day job, I'm not going to look it up. You get something from someone to get started. Maybe at some point you get a blue chicken to give a depressed guy in the woods, who gives you mushrooms to give to a potion maker, who gives you medicine for him. You bring it back and Fado says he's dead, and takes the medicine because it belongs to the forest because the mushrooms do, and gives you his saw. You give his saw to his dad, who gives you a broken sword. You take that to a giant blacksmith Goron, whose brother gives you a janky mega sword that easily breaks, and he's like, yeah, he sucks, I'll make one that doesn't break, but my eyes, ow, I need eye drops, go to the lab by the lake. So you go to the lab, and he's like, okay, but I need special frog for this, go to King Zora, and like, who's engaged to Princess Ruto? It's like, I guess you mean the old king, and he gives you a frog, so you rush back to the lab and get the eye drops, but have to run straight across the entire map to give them to Big Goron, who 3 days later gives you the finished sword. Let's see how I did. Yeah, that's basically right, except the blue chicken starts as an egg and you use it to wake up Talon so he can retake the branch after beating Ingo. Mask sequence is right, except you do the spooky quote-unquote mask before you get the bunny hood. I think that's literally everything except some mini-games, and apart from the cool one you can only enter at night that's a guessing game unless you cheat with the Lens of Truth, they're mostly all target shooting with a slingshot bow or bomb shoe. I'm happy this was about Ocarina of Time and not Majora's Mask.